Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to Global Ventures here on Planet Coaster. Today we are rebuilding Antony and Cleopatra. Antony being the B&M Flawless coaster that we've got here in the Valley of the Nile section of the park, and Cleopatra being the inverted B&M coaster that we've got here in this section of the park. Now, quick disclaimer before we move on in this video. This took me several attempts, not just to build but also to record. For some reason the game just was not working with OBS, so I had to tweak quite a few settings. I haven't changed any game settings, but I had to tweak a lot of OBS settings in order to get them to actually cooperate with one another. But very pleased to say it has seemed to have worked. So you've missed me build the sort of opening bit to Antony, or the opening rebuild to Antony, but I'm quite happy with the result of at least the opening section. And again, I'll put a little disclaimer in here now, because some people might comment at the end of the video and say, oh, they look a little bit janky still, Mark. And I think you're right, in all honesty. If people are thinking that, I think you might have a point. I'm not 100% happy with them still. I'm still learning how to kind of hand build custom elements. I did it quite a lot when I was rebuilding Bandito, but I think B&M coasters are very well known for their smoothness, whereas Gerstlauer coasters, I mean, they're still smooth to start with, but they do have a little bit more of a kick to them, shall we say. Particularly rides like Saw the Ride at Thorpe Park. It's 10 years old this year, and the last time I rode it was 5 years ago, and I came off with a sore spine. So they're not notoriously rough necessarily, but they're also not notoriously smooth. So particularly Antony has a few janky bits in the second half of the ride. First half is relatively okay, and then Cleopatra sort of okay in the second half. The pacing was a little bit off to begin with. I had to tweak both ride layouts considerably in order to get the pacing to be right. But actually, the one thing I am most happy with in this entire project is the pacing of the rides. It's actually worked out very well. Purely by accident as well. So the trains leave the station at the same time. They reach the top of the lift hill at the same time. Antony then does get a little bit of a head start because Antony's first drop is a lot steeper than Cleopatra's. There isn't as much interaction as I'd have liked. The tracks do snake around one another during the first half of the rides, but the actual interaction levels, because the fact that the two trains aren't in the same part of the ride at the same time, there isn't much interaction, not like what I was hoping for. But they do arrive at the block breaks at the end of the ride at the exact same time, and that for me I think is a big deal, because originally Cleopatra finished 20 seconds before Antony did, and although the ride will still wait for the opposing side to be ready before both trains are dispatched, the fact that the rides are the exact same duration, or pretty much the exact same duration, was a big deal. That's actually kind of cool that I managed to get that to work. So let me talk you through both rides. You will get POVs of both at the end of the video, and I'm also trying to fill the video at this moment in time because it's quite a long one today. This whole build, mainly because of OBS consistently not working properly, and you know, a few other things here and there. The whole build took about 3 to 4 hours to do, and that was recorded over 3 different sessions plus the 2 POVs. So I was up late last night trying to get this finished so that it will go up on Wednesday, which is when you're watching this, hopefully. But yeah, both rides have 7 inversions. Antony has a dive loop, a 0G roll, a cobra roll, what have I missed? Oh yeah, an incline loop and 2 corkscrews. Cleopatra has 7 inversions, same as Antony. Cleopatra has a vertical loop, a dive loop, a 0G roll, a bat wing, and 2 corkscrews. I wanted each ride to have separate styles of inversion as well as to be separate types of ride. Reason being is you've got to have a reason for people to ride both sides. If both rides were pretty much mirrored layouts, even if one was a flawless and one was an inverted, there's nothing really that makes people want to go, I've ridden Cleopatra, now I want to ride Antony. Sounds really weird when you say it like that, but you know what I mean. So I had to find a reason for people to want to go on both rides, and you would have seen this a lot in the original video clips that didn't make it for various reasons. But originally I had a first drop for Antony that led into a vertical loop, and it just was not working. I tried and tried and tried, and I couldn't find a way to make it fit. Reason being is I wanted the 0G roll on Antony to run through the center of Cleopatra's loop. You can see there it runs just underneath the lift hill and just over the top of the loop. This is me doing a quick POV just to check the smoothness of the first section of the ride. And again, you can kind of see, I mean, it's not real time obviously, it's quite fast, but you can kind of see what I mean about the jankiness. Some sections are quite smooth, some sections not so much. That last little bit there, it kind of does a double hop to the left. So I've changed that now, so that's one continuous left-hander rather than a left straight left. The bits I like about the ride are the way it does thread its way through those two corkscrews. So it's a bit janky, it's not the smoothest in the world, but I am actually very happy with the way that it's worked out. And I really like the overbank turn between the first and the second corkscrew as well. I have had to move the railway a couple of times in order to thread it through the rebuild of these two tracks, but I'm quite happy with the result. You'll see me here building another huge overbank turn on Antony. This all gets scrapped. It didn't work out. Like, the actual track looked fine, but the pacing, this is the reason why Cleopatra entered the brakes 20 seconds earlier than Antony, because of this little weaving round bit here. So my solution was to lift up the brake section a little bit, and then just have a straight, I say straight, have a left-hander right-hander combo, or right-hander left-hander combo going into the mid-course brakes. You'll see here as well I added another dive loop. It was hard to justify that. That's all been removed. You'll see it in the POV at the end anyway, because the POV is as up to date as the ride is currently. The sad thing is, this ride worked really well with that extra dive loop. I thought it added quite a lot to the ride. The reason I really took it out, as opposed to extending Cleopatra, is for some reason inverted coasters don't quite have the same momentum as flawless coasters. So Antony could have done another couple of inversions still and made it into the brakes, whereas Cleopatra was really struggling. And as far as I'm aware, the brakes are at the same height on both rides, so it must just be a loss of momentum. And I could have gone into the game settings and, you know, tweaked the friction on the ride and things like that, but I don't like doing that because it doesn't feel very realistic. Even though amusement parks, theme parks do lubricate the track and they do lubricate the wheels of their rides in order to get the rides to run a little bit faster on certain days. I kind of feel like going in and tweaking game settings is kind of manipulating the game perhaps a little too much, at least for my liking. It's a personal opinion though. I don't have anything against those who do choose to do that. I just don't think it's for me. So I did take out this second dive loop, plus we already have a dive loop, and I know Riddler's Revenge at Six Flags Magic Mountain has 2 dive loops, but I'm not a fan of having 2 of the same element, and I know I'm saying that despite having a ride with 2 corkscrews in, but I don't know, corkscrews kind of feel like they're one of a pair. It's like a Cobra roll is technically the same element in reverse. I don't like rides that have 2 vertical loops. I don't like rides that have 2 dive loops or 2 Immelmans, because there's so many other elements that you could have. Plus B&M is known for its double corkscrews. I feel like I'm justifying this way too much, but you know what I mean. B&M is known for its double corkscrews and things like that, so to have them included was always a given. But yeah, to have each side have its own unique elements. I really like the idea of the flawless coaster has the Cobra roll, and then the inverted coaster has the Batwing as well. That seems pretty cool to me. So yeah, we're rebuilding Cleopatra now, and again you'll see me spending a long time trying to get this Batwing where I want it. And the reason is, I'm trying to find a way to build the Batwing and then get the track up into its mid-course brakes. Boy oh boy, did this take a long time. Mainly due to the support structure of rides, and I'm a little bit frustrated by this. I still like the in-game supports, and I would still choose them over custom supports, mainly due to laziness, but also due to the fact that it's the most organic way to actually get the track to connect to the supports, is to use the in-game ones. But having said that, the Cobra roll on Antony is going to have some custom supports, because as you can see where the corkscrews are in that Cobra roll, there are no supports. And I'm not quite sure why that is, because if you actually look at that section, there's a huge gap in the middle where a support structure could fit in quite easily, and yet for some reason there isn't one. I do end up feeding Cleopatra's track through that gap, which could justify why there isn't one. But even then I felt like they could have squeezed one in the sides somewhere, and they didn't, so it's a little frustrating. So I will have to go and build some custom supports in order to make that work. And I was considering having the Cobra roll here be one of the pathway entrances to this area. One of the drawbacks to this big project is there isn't that much room for pathways. And I mean the landscape here is completely scarred, where I've just been building and rebuilding and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have to flatten all the land out first. But yeah, I kind of felt like either the Batwing or the Cobra roll would have been good to have a path running through. And I will look at that again, probably next episode if not the one after, to see if I can make that work, because that would be a nice feature to have. Plus, as I said, the railway's been rerouted slightly, so there's a little bit more room in the centre now than there was before. And then next on the to-do list will be to build the spinning coaster in this area as well, which will go slightly closer to the lake, just behind the Batwing. I don't know whether it will interact with the Batwing or not, probably not in hindsight, but you never know, it might do. So this is the next part of the problem. So we got the mid-course brakes in, now I'm trying to build the corkscrews. And again, I don't know what it is, like the flawless coaster, I pretty much built it first time. And then on this coaster, I really struggled to get these corkscrews in, and I just don't know what made it so hard. I guess I just had builder's block and just hadn't really recognised that. Also the fact that these brakes here, very close to the park boundary, which made building the finale of the ride very, very difficult. In the end I settled for a rising helix, a bit like Nemesis Inferno at Thorpe Park, where it kind of almost turns you 90 degrees on your side to go up into the final brakes. Ignore what I'm building here, this isn't the final product. And again, I'm actually happy with the finale of Cleopatra. The corkscrews are quite fluid, which again you'll see in the POV. The only bit I don't like is the rise from the Batwing into the mid-course brakes. And I think given the opportunity I'd rebuild all of that and try again. Try and make that work. Plus these coasters are both quite lengthy. They're quite spaced out. So I have to try and find a way to perhaps make it a bit more compact. And I was also considering lowering both coasters into the ground a little bit more as well, which might again involve rerouting the railway slightly. The reason I wanted to do that is I was looking at the gondola station after I rebuilt all of this, and the gondolas run pretty much just behind the dive loop of Antony. And as cool as that would look normally, bear in mind the fact that Antony and Cleopatra are both supposed to be indoors, like buried underground, in order to get the dark effect. So it would be a bit odd, let's say, to have the gondola be indoors as well. I would rather that be outdoors. And then the other problem is you don't have this like sheer cliff face next to the gondolas, and even if I put trees and stuff on it and try and decorate it, it'll be very, very obvious there's something hiding inside the structure. So I think the solution is to move the gondolas slightly, and also to lower the two coasters so that the building doesn't have to be quite as high. I think they're the two best solutions to this problem, but we'll see. We will see. It's all about trial and error at that point. And before I do any kind of terraforming, I will be building the actual building that all of this area takes place in first, and then burying it and see what happens from that. Because ultimately I want this to look good, as well as be the practical effect that I was going for. So yeah, we're once again working on the second half of Cleopatra. I think this is the version that actually stays. See, I'm just watching here for pacing. They do kind of interact with each other. there's no near-miss elements. I think that's one of the drawbacks. Once you get off the lift hill, there's no real near-miss elements with the other train. There are some near-miss elements with the other track. So for example, Antony, you do duck under Cleopatra's track a couple of times, and Cleopatra has some foot chopper effects on Antony's track. But it's not like Dueling Dragons where the two vertical loops almost collide. It would have been really cool if I'd managed to make that work. And I was considering rebuilding both rides to make that work. But without like going to a drawing board almost and trying to find some collision points. And one of the problems I have with Planet Coaster, and it's such a weird problem to have with this game, the track is almost too freeform. Like trying to get the 0G roll of Antony to thread through that loop took me an hour. In fact, it took me over an hour, because I was constantly having to change the length of track pieces in order to get the track to line up perfectly with the center. And even then, once I'd got it to line up perfectly with the center, I then had to line it up in the other direction so that the top, the apex of the 0G roll was right underneath the two lift hills. And I'll be honest, it was an absolute nightmare trying to make that work. Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, I used to like building dueling coasters because you could just use the grid to line up the two tracks and have the two vertical loops. I think I did build a coaster on there once that was inspired by Dueling Dragons. It wasn't a remake or anything, but it was definitely inspired by, which was pretty cool. I thought it worked quite well. I can't remember what I called it though. Might have been like Batman vs Superman or something like that, because I was very much into building superhero themed rides at the time. So yeah, maybe one day we'll build a proper dueling coaster in this park, but for now we're kind of stuck with this, which is a shame, because this was meant to be one of the jewels in the crown of the park, and it was meant to be this big sort of dueling coaster, Antony versus Cleopatra, even though in reality they were quite fond of each other a lot of the time. So yeah, it's unfortunate that it ends up being like this, but as a structure, from a distance, it still looks pretty damn good. So I'm not too fussed about that. And it's still not very often you get two B&M coasters built right next to each other. So we've definitely achieved something here still. Yeah, this is me trying to experiment with getting Cleopatra's track to be just that little bit longer. To try and... Because at this point I was looking at Antony and thinking, well, that one after the second corkscrew, it sort of meanders around a little bit before it then finishes the ride. Could I do the same with Cleopatra? And the answer was, to an extent, yes. But it was probably better if I didn't try and mess around with it. That corkscrew did look really cool, but it was just a little too close to the first one. You kind of see there, I realised, oh, yep, that's a little too close. Tried to move it, didn't work. So yeah, we kind of went back to this idea. I'm trying to remember again how the ride actually finishes. Is it I think it's a right-hand corkscrew coming up in a second. Oh, it's a left-hand, sorry, corkscrew that comes up in a second. And I think the actual ride, in its finished version, just swoops round into the helix. I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah, no, I do remember. I think it pretty much off the brakes now. It just goes straight down. Yeah, I think this is how it ends up being. Yeah, it's just one of these things. I don't know what was going wrong with me at this time. Just trying to get all this to line up and work. It was just, I was getting more and more frustrated with myself. I was actually on Discord with the XVI guys while I was doing this, and I mean, they could tell you how annoyed I was getting with this coaster. I just kept saying things like, how come it worked with the first one and not this one? And things like that. And you know, I was actually streaming it on Discord at the same time, so they got to see just how much I was struggling trying to get all this to work. It was frustrating. It was very, very frustrating. But you'll see from the POVs, the finished article, I would say, is worth it. They are a couple of good coasters. Even on their own, they'd be a couple of good coasters. But you put them together, and I don't know, they just kind of form this good pair of B&M coasters. I'm still trying to remember how I actually got this ride to finish in the end. It wasn't that one. definitely wasn't that one. Look what I've done to the landscape though, because I don't do undo. You really should do like Control Z and go from there, but I just pressed the delete. So there's all these former tunnels, or you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like cuttings built into the ground where the track used to run. It's all for nothing. it'll get smoothed. It'll become part of the landscape. It was actually an idea anyway. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to lower the two coasters into the ground a little bit more as well. One of the ideas was, particularly with Cleopatra, was to base it on Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa, and actually have it very close to the ground. A lot of people on Reddit sort of dismiss Nemesis as an inverted coaster these days. I have noticed that a lot of people who do that haven't ridden Nemesis, and I think that's one of the reasons why. It's 25 years old this year, I think, Nemesis. 94, I believe it opened. And what a ride. Again, I haven't been on it for 5 years now, so it might have changed a little bit since then, but when I last went on it, what a ride. It is absolute genius how they managed to build a ride of that scale in an area of the park where it would have been almost impossible to build a ride of that scale. And one of the things that kind of gets overlooked with Nemesis is it never reaches its top speed at the start of the ride. Like most B&M inverted coasters these days, particularly things like the Batman clones, Banshee at Kings Island, even rides like Osiris at Park Asterix, they always have a big first drop, and that's where you hit your top speed. Whereas on Nemesis, you don't hit your top speed until the bottom of the vertical loop, and that's like the middle of the ride. And from the time you leave the lift hill, you go down that very, very, very deceptive first drop that leads into the corkscrew. And then from there on until you hit the bottom of that vertical loop, you are constantly picking up speed. And there's just something about that, almost hitting the rock walls as well. All the near miss elements, the fact that the vertical loop is built right in the bottom of a pit, and until you get round to the back of the station, you don't even know that there's a vertical loop there because you can't see it. There's so much about that ride that is so awesome. The hidden corkscrew as well, the last inversion of the ride, it's just absolute top notch. And that's what I wanted this ride to be. Obviously it has a very tall lift hill, but this second section of the ride, the two corkscrews, the overbank turns, the helix, it's all very low, very close to the ground. And even the bottom of the Batwing is very, very close to the ground. Plus the curve underneath the station, which is something I forgot to mention actually. From the dive loop, the sweeping left-hand turn under the two station structures is still there. Cleopatra was actually a lot easier to edit than Antony in terms of how much track is actually changed. So the first drop has been reprofiled slightly, but it's pretty much exactly how it was before. The vertical loop is still the same, the dive loop is still the same, the curve underneath the stations is still the same, the 0G roll is still the same. What I should have done to rebuild it was, after the 0G roll, what did it go into? I think it was an Immelman, and then it had like a little bump section of track, and then it went into the two corkscrews. I should have built the block brakes there and just made it nice and easy, but I didn't. But anyway, that does it for the two rebuilds. The two POVs will be coming up on screen in just a second. Antony first and then Cleopatra. So I'll start wrapping up here. Thank you very much everybody for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. And of course, if you're enjoying the series, drop some comments down below with ideas for future episodes. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for your continued support. Enjoy the videos, the POVs. And until next time, I will see you soon.
you.